Fear Falter, and glad to see yourself back and full swing as well. Look, we're at another situation now in our country where more restrictions rolled out this evening. Even though they've been drip-fed all week or 10 days and business has been put into disarray, people contacting all politicians' offices, about the cancellations and about the uncertainty. I'm not talking about hospitality in total, I'm talking about across the board, boutiques and shops and clothes shops, and people were spending a little for Christmas, deposits paid and they've been looked for back and whatever. The people have run through hell and back. Either the vaccine passes are useless, Minister, and we get rid of them, or we require restrictions, or they work, at which point you certainly don't need further restrictions. So it has to be one or the other, I believe, at this point in time. Both situations can't be true at the same time. But this government, while acting as though the vaccine passes don't work by implementing restrictions, continue to discuss the extension and widespread use of other restrictions. It's bizarre. Where's the logic? Where's the science that you're going to talk about? The Minister has failed dismally, you Minister have failed dismally to get this situation under control. Nefert have failed in their duties and they have lost the support of the public a long time ago. Not now, but a long time ago. They have failed to build up hospital bed capacity and ICU capacity, despite being given the resources to do so. I might put on the record here that the HSE and the Department of Health got an extra £3.884 billion on top of the 20 billion odd that they had for 2020. That's not to mention what is spent in this year. We're just coming to the closing. And it shudders to think that we only have so little capacity in our ICU or so little increase. The waste has been just pure shocking. They have failed to build the hospital bed capacity in the ICU, despite being given, as I said, huge resources and given huge additional powers, which I'll refer to in a minute, which are in this piece of legislation. Minister, in the last 4 weeks, and this is thanks to Deputy Tobin's PQ, 26 outbreaks have taken place in our nursing homes. 81 in our hospital settings, new outbreaks, 27 in residential care for people with disabilities, places that we need to protect and haven't protected, and 7 in refuges and places of respite for women. And we pick on the hospitality today. Once again, an easy group to pick on, and they've been hammered all the way through. While there are very few cases in hospitality, I have them somewhere, but they're all in, wouldn't come up to one of those lot in the hospitals, between the hotels and pubs and all. I think about 12 in all in the last 4 weeks. It's shocking. Shocking what it is. I have serious concerns about the powers of Nefert, their level of control over almost every element of Irish society at present, and their lack of accountability. I have a paediatrician contact me today, a very eminent one, saying that they wasn't consulted. He certainly wasn't, but paediatricians weren't, about the mask wearing enforcement on children. Although it's only a requirement, you're putting the fear of God on the school boards of management and school principals. I've been contacted by numerous of them who have a duty of care to the children, they know that. And they have responsibilities huge, and they know that. And the boards are voluntary boards who do tremendous work, and their principals and their staffs. And now they're in this perilous situation. Nefert have no paediatrician, I understand, on their extensive groups of people advising them. HICWA have advised them, in this case, I think twice already, not to mask young children, that it was not good for them, and it's been thrown in the bin. So we want to close a nursing home, I want to use HICWA to do something, we do it. But when they give advice that Nefert don't like, we just bin it. So where's the models, and when they're wide off the mark, who holds Nefert to account? When there's leaks coming out from that organisation and misinformation leading to despair within an industry, who are they to answer to? Nefert I'm talking about. When they ignore bodies such as HICWA, as I said, implement restrictions on our children with no debate, no requirement for legislation, no pre-legislative scrutiny on this either, no parental consent, how can we say that we are we're operating in a functional and a democratic society? We clearly are not. You and your Taoiseach and Tánaiste Cabinet have abdicated your responsibility to Nefert. And their sideshows going on are competitions for the airwaves. If it isn't one, it's the other. And mixed messages have been appalling. Nefert have no business on the airways. You're the government, duly elected, they were voted in here, not thanks to my vote, but you were voted in here, cobbled up coalition, and you're either hiding behind Nefert and you want to let them do this, or you think it's good, or else you haven't the gumption to face them down when they needed to be faced down. Yes, listen to their science when the science is correct. Yes, listen to their advice, but you make decisions for our people, not for somebody. I asked you before, when you're going to sign all these statutory instruments which you have in this legislation tonight, when you were in opposition, you were railing against them. I asked you here before, no, in the convention, who's pushing your hand? What heavy hand is the big farmer's heavy hand that's pushing you to sign those instrument after instrument after instrument, one more draconian than the next? As I said, here are we again facing severe restrictions. With Christmas coming, topped, and people want to be happy and have a celebration of the holy season of Christmas and the birth of our Lord. Over 93% of our population, you tell us, are vaccinated. Where does this end? We're at a situation this evening where hospitality, once again, as they are facing and frightened restrictions and never want to tell the public who they can and can't have in their homes. Well, we get serious here. I mean, this is not fair. And the people now in the hospitality and other industries, as I said, are going to be forced onto pub payments again. I understand there's going to be pub payments for people, but what about all the people coming after them? They won't be able to get back on them again, and they need to be supported into the future and into the new year. What about the music entertainment industry? There are many areas I could talk about here all night long, but I want to refer to this piece of legislation, draconian legislation that you've implemented here, that we only got the bill yesterday, that we got a briefing notice last Thursday late, and that you're a conglomeration of 4 pieces of previous legislation. Now we put into one. You didn't call it an omnibus, but you could. But it's giving you dangerous powers. And power is a dangerous thing, Minister. And you never have sat in the office of the Minister of Health without these powers. So you don't know what it's like to be an ordinary minister with normal powers. Extension of Section 2, Part 3 of the Health Provision and Preservation and Other Emergency Acts in the Public Interest, Act 2020. Inserting a statutory instrument S38A in the Principal Act of 1974 raises serious legal and ethical concerns surrounding the detention and isolation of persons in certain circumstances. And it does, Minister. And this is not my words. These are words of legal experts that have voluntarily helped me to put this together tonight. And I might remind you that in 1971, in 1971, internment was introduced up in 6 counties. In 1974, Act, as I said, this section contravenes Article 5, right to liberty, Article 6, right to fair trial, Article 8, right to private and family life of the European Convention of Human Rights, and Article 40.4 of the Constitution. Have you read all this, Minister? Have you looked at it? Or who's drafting it for you? Or how do you think that you can have the powers to be an instrument to deal with all this? There is no sufficient evidence base for the extension of the sweeping power, which provides a medical officer with the power to make an order in writing for the detention and isolation of such person in a hospital or other place specified in the order, which we don't know yet, including other hospitals or places specified, including other places, as may subsequently be appropriate and specified in the order, which you may fill in and sign, with no recourse to it all, until such time as that medical officer certifies that the person's detention is no longer required for the purposes of the section. That is quite draconian, Minister. By any yardstick, the medical officer can, he or she, invoke the powers under Statute Instrument 38A, Part 1, where he or she believes in good faith that A person is a potential source of infection, and B, the person is a potential risk to the public health, and C, his or her detention and isolation is appropriate in order to prevent and minimise or slow the spread of COVID-19, and to minimise the risk to human life and public health. And D, such a person cannot be effectively isolated, refuses to remain or appears unlikely in his or her home or other accommodation agreed by the Health Service Executive. You have to mind your own services. I just gave you the figures, courtesy of Deputy Tobina, of the outbreaks in hospital settings in the last 4 weeks, and compare them to in other areas. They're minuscule in other areas compared to what's going on under your watch, and you're penalising the people. The necessity of the extension of this measure has not been demonstrated. In accordance with the Freedom of Information Act 2014, the Health Service Executive should and must provide details of how many orders have been made under Statute Instrument 38A1 since the inception of the emergency legislation in March 2020. We haven't got that, Minister. And I hope you know it. In the interest of transparency and openness, in the public interest, for such information to be published before any debate on the extension of the necessity to extend power to detain an isolated person, depriving them of their rights or a fair trial and a private family life and liberty. And is that why you had no pre-legislative scrutiny in this legislation? That you didn't bring it to committee? The fact that you're bringing 3 or 4 pieces of legislation that has no pre-legislative scrutiny, rushed through it all with little debate, and passed here with your government majority? Is that why you didn't want it? Because you might be asked these questions. Also, Article 38A 2, a medical officer in making this power shall have regard to the fact that COVID-19 is recently declared by the World Health Organization to be a pandemic. It was recently declared back in March 2020, Minister. How long am I going to stay stuck back? The clock stopped at 2020. And the WHO have a lot of questions to answer as well, so you can't say this is a necessary implement now, 20 months later, 21 months later. It's now 21 months since the announcement of these emergency powers, and the state has had ample opportunity put in place the public health measures for the purpose of preventing, limiting and diminishing or slowing the spread of COVID-19, referred to under the Articles 38A, with the consequential effect that this measure is no longer justifiable. Such a power can only be justifiable if the state can show a grave risk to life, and recent statistics issued by the HSPC showed a dramatic decrease, thank God, in COVID-19 related deaths since 2020, Minister. This is the basic naked facts and the science that approved them, but you only use selective science. The reasoning and rationale for this measure no longer exists, and the state have not proven sufficient to justify any extension of such a draconian power. The existence of the Omicron variant and ever-emerging new variants is not sufficient remaining for such powers in a democratic society. Not at all, Minister. We can get variants like we've all the storms and a different acronym for every one of them. The very fact that a medical officer can make an order under Statute 38A1 if a person is a potential source of infection and a potential risk to the public health raises fundamental issues surrounding the subjective implementation of these terms. It is deeply concerning that one medical officer has the power to make such an order based on their belief, in good faith, that a person is a potential source of infection. In effect, this means that a person can be made subject to a detention and isolation order without testing positive for COVID-19. That is shocking, truly shocking. Minister, in my opinion, and the legal experts who I thanked that formulated this opinion with me. This means that a person could be detained and isolated by a medical officer as a result of his or her own subjective view, the medical officer, of what constitutes potential source of infection and potential risk to public health. There are no safeguards in place to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of the person who could be deprived of their liberty on the word of said medical officer. For example, in this current climate, it is not beyond imagination, Minister, that a medical officer could make such an order under Statute 38A1 for detention and isolation simply because the person is unvaccinated, for whatever reason, unable to take them, or by choice, or whatever reason. The power of detention is open to abuse of power process, as the Act requires only one medical officer to make an order for detention. That is quite serious and dangerous in a so-called democracy, a so-called republic. Under Statute 38A, the medical officer may, in writing, order the detention and isolation of such person in a hospital or other place specified in the order, including such other hospital or other place as may be subsequently appropriate and specified in the order. You could decide it's the Curragh camp. You could decide it's anywhere. It'll be up to your officials and your hand to sign the order. Minister, do you realise what you're taking upon yourself? I think you do. I think you're punch drunk with these powers, and you haven't the clue how to run the department or rein in that or deal with the epidemic and in the medical system. Until such time as the medical office, as I said, to continue there, including such other potential places as subsequently appropriated as specified in your order, until such time as the medical office certifies that the person's detention is no longer required. I don't see that any different from what happened in the North in 1971. For the purposes of this section, the extensive power to detain a person in any place specified in the order is not defined under the Act, which effectively means a person could be detained anywhere at the discretion of the medical officer. There's no definitions. Most legislation have definitions and have defines and have appeal systems to make it. This is rushed again. No pre-legislative scrutiny. You're getting away with blue murder. If you get away with this, if enough people vote for it, I hope they don't. I certainly won't be, and my colleagues in the rural independents won't be. The Act does not specify the maximum period of detention, which is another very serious situation. It states that a medical officer may, in writing, order the detention and isolation of such a person in a hospital or other specified in order to, until such time as the medical officer, say a medical officer, certifies that the person's detention is no longer required. So he's there at the whim of the medical officer. The medical officer is under a duty to review the detention no later than 14 days. You can be incarcerated for 14 days. The detained person has no right to request a review by another person other than that medical officer, not even another medical physician officer, but there are no details on this process, and therefore it breaches the rules of fair procedure, due process and natural justice. Or have you ever heard of those, Minister? Have you lost them all since you were independent with me? Then you were with the Social Democrats, and then you jumped to Fianna Fáil. And then whatever sleazy deal get to become Minister for Health. Have you lost all your moral compass and your respect for the people's rights and the Constitution? You must have. The state has therefore failed to justify the proportionality and necessity for such a far-reaching measure, depriving people of their right to liberty. Very serious. 100 years after we fought so hard, Tracy and Breen and Liam Lynch and Michael Collins and all the people that died in the War of Independence and unfortunately the Civil War, and all the people that gave their lives and sacrifices. And to think then that I've heard people here looking for people to be snitch lines, coming from parties I'm very surprised with, to have reporting on people and everything else. We're dividing society, we're creating an apartheid, and it's totally, totally wrong. The variance is not specific enough reason for this, Minister. We have some clinical data, trial data from the pre-alpha strains and lab data for Delta. We may overlook some data, but we have no epidemiological information or vaccination that the vaccination has any impact on the epidemic. For Omicron, the genetic data suggests that the vaccines may not work. It will take at least 2 weeks to find out whether they work, in the labs that is. As the example the Delta has shown, even lab data is not enough to justify any restrictions or mandates. We need evidence that the restrictions and mandates have an effect. Just having them there is not just good enough, Minister. Just not good enough that you want them there, and you like the powers, and you want to keep them, and you want to beat down our people, our very resilient, brilliant people, our many people that we lost, and so sad, even one life, but many people that succumbed to this. The amount of people who died in nursing homes and hospitals that I have called time and time again for an internationally led investigation of people, of what happened here, the incarceration of what went on here. I believe The Hague will have to be invoked, the trials, to bring people before the courts there, the world courts. But the UK and Ireland had a narrow peak, in the late January and a nadir in late May. The EU's nadir was a month later. For the current wave, this means that Ireland's deaths, thankfully, are rather remaining Ireland deaths are flat, that going up as much as the EU, thank God. Here, the Delta epidemic is that the UK and Ireland are past its peak. That's the science, Minister. They're the facts. Also, thankfully, also the number of deaths per day per million is 1,000 in the EU, which is horrific, 100 in the UK and 10 in Ireland. The 1 to 10 Ireland-UK ratio per capita was the same for the last 18 months, Minister. So there's ample science, Minister, if you want to listen to it. There's ample reason to behave, and the people did put their shoulder to the wheel. And they invoked the sense of the male, which we're very good at in our good old country, Ireland, and helping each other. And they cower out of Gochdina and Gochénia. But now they're downtrodden and they're broken, and you're trying to kill their spirit and the resolve. You've it done to many sections, the music and our culture and our tanga and many other areas. Please, please, I ask you to withdraw this legislation. Bring it back to pre-legislative scrutiny. It's time to give people hope. And together we can fight this and go on honestly and truthfully and face the people with truth. Good.